My name is Rachel Allyn, and I'm really excited to be taking over Shambhala Publications Instagram this afternoon for this live to celebrate the launch of my new book called The Pleasure Is All Yours, Reclaim Your Body's Bliss, and Reignite Your Passion for Life. So a little bit about me. My name is Rachel Allyn, and I have my PhD in clinical psychology. I'm a holistic psychologist, and I really focus on mind-body connection, so somatic psychology, and I integrate that with Eastern and Western medicine. And one of my main areas of specialty is relationship issues and intimacy and sexual health. So a lot of my work and a lot of this book is really at the intersection of somatic psychology and intimacy issues and relationship issues, really bridging those together. I have been in private practice for probably 15 years. I've been in the field of psychology about 20 years. And I am, interested. How does your book address bodily bliss? Thank you. That's Art of Connection now. Thanks for that question. I'll definitely get to that. I'm definitely going to address sort of how we can feel better in our bodies. Was just going to say that I, in addition to being a psychotherapist, I'm a yoga teacher, and I also love to do workshops and lead retreats. So stay tuned, and I can fill you in more about some of that information if we have time at the end. So what is this book about? The Pleasure Is All Yours. Reclaim Your Body's Bliss and Reignite Your Passion for Life. It's quite a hopeful and fun title, but it actually, the origins of the book are from something that's really not all that fun. It was really about me trying to understand how did the United States become really one of the most repressed countries in the world? And what is the cost of that repression and that disconnection from our bodies, from our emotions, from expressing ourselves, whether it be expressing our emotions or just expressing ourselves in movement and dance and joy. That repression and disconnection from really our right to feel good in our body, and particularly from our right to feel pleasure, with especially erotic pleasures being deemed a real dirty word and dirty concept. So I wanted to understand, how is it that we have this mind-body split, and we also have this real pleasure as healthy split, and that here we are with centuries of conditioning around this repression and disconnection, and here we are really feeling the effects of that, with anxiety worse than ever, insomnia, our over-reliance on pharmaceuticals, relationships, people feeling lonely in their relationships, or divorce rates being higher, the extent to which people are burnt out and tired, dealing with that feeling of languishing. And I really wanted to help explain how we got here, provide a call to action as far as what we might be able to do, and a roadmap in order to get back to wholeness, back to connecting our body, really connecting to the innate wisdom of our body, and how to get back to really then giving ourselves permission to receive in life different pleasures, all different sorts of healthy pleasures and balance. And how that can really help us to have more resilience and altruism for others. So it's really then about ultimately collective care when we aren't in this place of repression and burying things, really causing the disease that we feel to become disease in our body. So I think what's wonderful is that we now know, thanks to advances in science, what we now know is how wise our body is. Now, our bodies have always known this. On a visceral level, we have always known this. But because of the centuries of conditioning telling us that our bodies are savage, impulsive, and that really we should be in our minds. Our minds are the seat of reason and wisdom. So we denigrated the body, we elevated the mind. And now we know, no wonder we are really these overthinking creatures. And on top of that, staring at screens all day. So what we really know more and more now, and those who are practitioners of somatic psychology and yoga practitioners, we all really know all the more so that when we're working with our clients and our students, that bringing in the body is so powerful because of the ways in which our body stores our trauma. And not only does trauma live in our body, but it wants movement and it wants to be released and dislodged. So a lot of this work really then in my book talks about what I call bodyfulness. So bodyfulness, I was not the first person to use that word. However, when I started using it, I wasn't aware of anyone else. Bodyfulness is a book written by Christine Caldwell. And so it's really gaining momentum. I'm so excited that this idea of bodyfulness is, I think it's really going to be this next frontier in more holistic health. And so what I talk about in the book is really how bodyfulness, and I'll explain the layers of bodyfulness in a moment, but how bodyfulness really then can open us up to giving ourselves permission to reclaim our birthright of receiving all different pleasures in life, whether it be connecting to nature, connecting to our senses as we taste that first bite of food, taking time to balance work with play, connecting to flow states, and of course, trying to have a healthier relationship connecting to our sexual and erotic pleasures, which as we know can be kind of pretty loaded for a lot of people. As I said in a blog post today that Shambhala released in their e-newsletter, we all have a body and we all came from sexual beings, and we were all meant to be these expressive individuals with our bodies, with our emotions, and connect intimately with others. And yet everybody I know has a story of shame connected to their body, to their body, their sexuality, and their emotional expression. Let me just explain a little bit about the 3 layers of bodyfulness. So there's really, the first part is embodied mindfulness. And so most of us all know, especially people who follow Shambhala on Instagram, are quite well aware of mindfulness. And the first layer of bodyfulness is having embodied mindfulness. So are you even paying attention to what's happening in your body? Are you listening, or are you stuck in your head? Or maybe do you sometimes listen to what your body's messages are, but you override them? I think that people's addiction to caffeine might be one example of how we override our body's messages for rest and sleep, and we're in this attempt to basically be robots. A lot of this came from the fact that some of our conditioning from the Industrial Revolution that said, I think, therefore I am, and we are machines and we need to work, and that's really come at quite a cost. And so we have learned, unfortunately, to override our body's messages and just not even pay attention or to denigrate the body until it really speaks up, until we get an ulcer or a migraine or twitching in our face, or something that really says our body's way of saying can't take it anymore. Panic attacks, I think, can also be connected to that as well. So that first part of bodyfulness that I talk about in the book and in my work with clients and students is just helping people to listen to the language of their body. And some examples I'll read for you that are also in the book. So noticing your muscles when they're active, muscles when they're resting. How you're breathing. Breath for sure, I think recognize as a really, powerful life force energy. So noticing your breath, but also things like your posture, whether you're fidgeting or being still, your body temperature, how you feel on your right side of the body versus your left, heaviness in any area, just also things like thirst, hunger, fullness, emptiness, patterns in energy and fatigue, congestion, which foods digest well, which don't, how laughter feels in your body, how crying feels in your body. And another really key part is where in your body do you feel each of your emotions? So I like to explain that our emotions are felt in our body, and then our mind is what turns them into feelings. I know a lot of people, it's confusing and there's some debate, and a lot of people use the words interchangeably. But in my work and in my trainings, I understand that we have emotions on a visceral level in our body. And the more that we're tuned into our body and really aware of that, the more we're really connected to our emotions that tell us, what do I really need right now? And that leads to the second layer of bodyfulness. So that first layer is really, I call it, there's the 3 Ds. The first D of bodyfulness is digging in. What do you notice? Listening, practicing not being so stuck in our heads, because our body is really that raw data. Our mind can take us into some storylines and beliefs that aren't really our truth. So as brilliant as our mind is, I'm not knocking the amazing nature of our mind and our brain, but I think that there's been so much emphasis there, but really the present moment reality of our body is really so wise. So the first layer of bodyfulness is really digging in, embodied mindfulness, but then that second layer is, the second D is discharge, which is really about self-regulation practices. This is where we kind of go from mindfulness into somatic therapies that I feel really fortunate to have been influenced by. There's a lot of different types of somatic therapies out there, and bodyfulness is certainly sort of paying homage to many of those and then building on from it. But that second layer of discharge is really about, well, what can I do now? And this is where it goes beyond mindfulness. Mindfulness is amazing for cultivating our awareness and really hoping to release judgment and that presence and embodiment. But then it falls short as far as releasing the trauma that can be held in our body and building that sense of self-agency to be able to really take care of what you need to move forward, take action as far as what you need. So some examples of that second layer can be anything that has to do with release. First I'm going to talk about discharge, and then I'm going to talk about containment strategies. But really anything that has to do with, it could be rocking, sweating, crying, auditory release, sighing. I'm a big person who sighs, and I immediately feel more regulated when I do that. Yawning, shaking, therapeutic things like massage and foam rolling and acupuncture, and of course things like yoga and different types of exercise. Now, sometimes we're in too much of a state of overwhelm, and what we really need before discharge is some containment practices. And of course, it's going to depend on the level of stress, level of trauma, what might be right for you. But some containment strategies include giving yourself a hug, getting a hug from somebody else, maybe finding a really confined space, enclosed space to go in, a weighted blanket, finding a child's pose, anything really centering and grounding. So that is that second layer of bodyfulness. And really what's so magical that happens from there is that we have this awareness paired with a toolbox of self-regulation strategies. And that leads to interoception, that really deep body awareness that is telling us what's going on with all the interworking systems within us. And from there, we have more body-mind confidence. We have better trust for ourselves. A lot of the effects of trauma is that we don't even trust our body, and we dissociate so much. So it creates this interoception of real awareness and tells us what we need right now. And over time, I think that really leads to not being in a survival mode, but being in a place where we can open up and expand to some of these other aspects of life, whether it be creativity, intimacy, other hobbies, our meaning, purpose. And so this third layer of bodyfulness, which is the third D is delight, is really about giving ourselves permission to receive the healthy pleasures in life that we're all meant to have. Moments of pleasure those moments are what add up to the longer lasting states of joy. And pleasure also ultimately aids in our resilience and our compassion for other people as well. So a lot of what I talk about in the book, the third section of the book is really about that third layer of bodyfulness that's delighting. And I talk about the different types of pleasure. Now, altruism is absolutely a type of pleasure. I don't focus on it as much in the book, in part because this is a book really aimed also for people, and it tends to often be people who are socialized as female, that tend to be too altruistic and give too much. and don't really give pleasures to themselves, or if they do, it comes with a lot of guilt. So I mentioned altruistic pleasures. They're absolutely essential, but I spend more time talking also about how we can reclaim sensual pleasures, that experience of being in nature and really connected to your senses. And food is, of course, a wonderful example, food being one of our earliest relationships, most primal relationships. I also, in addition to sensual pleasures, I talk about creativity and playfulness as a really key pleasure. As children, we were much more tuned into that, to our intuition and sort of our sense of play. And a lot of adults make play dates for their kids, but not for themselves. So really recognizing how pleasure brings us balance. It can be a really healthy release. Also talking about more of adventure and flow states as an important pleasure. And flow states can happen not only out in the world on a trip, but also in our livelihood, in our career. And how that is a pleasure all its own, of when we're really tuned in, we're so integrated and focused and sort of bringing our best self to something because we're passionate about it, we care about it. And then I, of course, also devote some chapters in the book to sexual and erotic pleasures because of just how, again, this, as I mentioned in the beginning of the live, our history of repression, and how pleasure we've had this reductionist attitude of pleasure as just equaling sex. And that's the only thing. So that's part of why I talk about the other types of pleasures that we need to reclaim for this real whole body humanness. But I definitely spent some time on helping us understand how to break free from some of the really shameful beliefs or confusion or misunderstanding around ourselves as sexual beings. And I talk not only about physical intimacy, but certainly about emotional intimacy as well, and really how all these different types of pleasures, it's like the foreplay of life, that the more that we really are connected to ourselves and receiving our right to receive these pleasures in balance, of course, because that's another thing I talk about in the book. It's one of the things I love about the concept of pleasure is that it is a little bit trickier. It can seduce us. If we don't have self-regulation practices from those first two layers of bodyfulness to help us cope with pain, then we're not going to have a healthy relationship with pleasure. We'll be pleasure seeking and we'll be turning to all these things outside of us. And the beautiful aspect of bodyfulness in this book is that you don't need a prescription. You don't need a lot of money to buy some fancy gadget. It really is from the body up. It's really coming back to what as humans we've always been capable of, that inner listening to our body and our needs, and the ability to cultivate balance between life's pleasures, but also being able to cope with the work and sort of the grim aspects as well. One of the things I talk about in the book is how when it comes to erotic and sexual pleasures, part of the problem and how it's gotten so dysfunctional is that we really focus so much on it being performative, being productive, and being really mechanical. And that doesn't sound that pleasurable at all, right? Physical intimacy that's really mechanical, all about production and performance, it just leaves us in our head. So again, it's about how can we really reclaim our own sense of self and authentic self as far as intimacy. So a lot of the book, in the first third of the book, it's really about that, like, how did we get here? That we are so sick in the US. And I compare us with some other cultures. Not that there aren't other cultures that I've repressed, but I compare us to some other cultures that really have a good, healthy balance between body connection and really receiving different healthy pleasures in their life individually and communally. And then in that second section, I talk about this call to action of how can we start with a personal revolution within, our own inner revolution that says, I'm not going to buy in or lean in to some of that conditioning, whether it be from our parents, from the media, from more ancestral trauma. I'm not going to buy into that. I'm going to really cultivate my own personal revolution that says, I'm going to own my body, be in my body, love my body, and really own my right to feel good and share that with others. Now, one thing I want to explain is that bodyfulness doesn't mean that we always feel sensational and pleasurable in our body every minute of every day. That's just not the reality of adulting in the modern world never has been. But it really, with those first two layers, the digging in and the discharging, those first two layers of bodyfulness, we have a stronger container. And we have this sense of empowerment and self-agency that really helps us ride the wave through those painful moments, those more grim times. And we now know that we're going through many of them individually, collectively. The collective trauma right now is I think also why this book, I think the timing is really good for this book. A lot of people might say a book about pleasure right now with everything going on. And that's where I really want to explain that it is so much, it's really needed right now, given the disconnection, how we are becoming like these cyborgs, just become one with our screens. And we are missing that just connection to self and energy with others. So I wanted to see if there's any other questions here. Okay, art of connection now. You said, are you exploring tantrism? And I definitely do talk about that, absolutely. The third layer of bodyfulness, well, let me back up. The first layer, like I said, is most influenced from mindfulness. The second layer is trauma, somatic therapies. And the third layer is definitely influenced, absolutely, from Tantra and the philosophy of Tantra. Not only Tantra as far as really just owning our right to feel pleasures in the world, you know, and whether it be nature and just that unabashedly that we deserve that as humans, but then also that element of Tantra that talks more about sensual and sexual intimacy, the slowing down, the connecting, the eye gazing, the true presence, the lack of rushing. So really getting out of that performative element, the mechanical, the productive, and being in the experience, the experiential process, and how intimacy, first with ourselves, that leads to intimacy with others, can really create such a profound energy, unlike anything we can experience necessarily on our own. But Tantra is, I think it's fascinating. I think it's really misunderstood. And while this book is not focusing specifically on Tantra, absolutely, that third layer of bodyfulness is really inviting that in and inviting that into everybody. And that's where bodyfulness also really departs from a lot of different types of somatic trauma therapies, which are very understandably so focused on people establishing safety. Because depending on, you know, the type of trauma and complex trauma, that can really take a while and be a lot of work just to help people even be in their body. So my book it's definitely a little bit more geared towards people who have already done some work on the trauma, if they have really complex and severe chronic trauma, because this is really going to that next level of then inviting in our right to pleasure and of all different kinds. And because I think we all know that we want to do more than survive and we want to thrive. And so this book is sort of picking up from a place where somebody maybe has already been able to find some sense of connection to self, has worked through, dislodged some of their trauma, and is a place where they can open up more to tantric ideas, also this sort of Epicurean lifestyle. All right. And then, all right, this is when I need my glasses. So, Thinly Dorha, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but you said, what made you focus more on sensation? I focus on sensation certainly regarding the fact that I don't think I focus on it more than other types of pleasure, but I definitely focus on how that is such a foundation of connection to our body. Now, our sensual self, it doesn't always feel good. I mean, our senses can bombard us and make us feel, you know, the lack of pleasure. I tell a story in the book about I was on an airplane once, and this woman had this little chihuahua on this long leash, and the dog like walked right into the aisle, down the aisle, and just took a crap right in the middle of the aisle. And this waft of dog poop smell just took over everybody. And how it's like in one moment you can be kind of in a pleasurable place in your senses, and the next minute can be kind of accosted by something that is, you know, the last thing you want to do is be connected to your senses. So all the dog owners out there, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. But I definitely talk about our senses because it's a really present moment reality place to start. one by one of each of our senses. And a lot of the second layer of bodyfulness is asking a lot of questions of sort of like, what feels good, what doesn't, what do I need, what is rest, what is balance for me, what are my senses telling me? They both kind of extend our field of perception, but they also are really signals for our inner world. So that interplay of our senses is really, I think, such a wise way to know where am I right now? How am I doing? What is my body telling me? And just seeing if there's any other questions. I know that the question earlier about how does this connect to our body's bliss. Bliss, a lot of these words, they can be loaded. Pleasure, bliss, joy, happiness. What is the difference between them all? Some of it is just, it's a beautiful alliteration, our body's bliss. But I think it's certainly possible. I wouldn't have written this book if I didn't think that a bodyful path, individually and when we're able to apply it collectively, if it couldn't lead to moments of bliss. And I say moments because, of course, it's not a state that is consistent 100% of the time. But I do know that everybody deserves a right to feel moments of bliss and belonging and connection. And ultimately, this book is really trying to fight body terrorism that exists in our culture, the othering of bodies and the judging of bodies for their skin color, for their performative value, for their adornment, for their ableism. And how can we really respect and revere our bodies and each other's, the brilliance of our bodies, the wise resources that they are, and from that place, from that foundation, how it can open us up to some of these wonderful moments that bring us a lot of joy in our life and really can help deepen our connection to others. And if you have any other questions, just message me. My website is drrachelallyn.com. It's Allyn. The website for the book is thepleasureisallyours.book.com. I just want to say thank you to Shambhala for giving me this opportunity. And thank you for everybody who has hopped on and is listening. And head on out and buy the book, the Kindle, the audio, or the actual paper book. All right. Well, the pleasure's been all mine. Thank you so much for joining.